In the dry, sun-baked plains of West Texas, a brutal mistake is about to unfold. A ruthless cartel crosses the border, targeting a quiet ranch owned by a young woman living alone. To them, it's just another easy piece of land to take by force. They're dead wrong, because Claire Dawes isn't just a rancher's daughter, and her father, Mason Dawes, isn't just some old Marine. For over 2 decades, he was the U.S. military's most feared warfighter, a ghost in desert combat, known only by his call sign, Dust Devil. This isn't just a fight over land. It's a war they didn't see coming. When the cartel came for his daughter, they thought they were intimidating a civilian. Instead, they triggered a calculated, ruthless retaliation from a man who turned guerrilla warfare into an art form. What follows is the story of how one man dismantled a cartel force with nothing but his ranch, a few tools, and the kind of experience that never fades. Before we jump back into what really happened on that ranch, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story fires you up, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's drop, let's just say it makes this look like the calm before the storm. Claire Dawes woke before the sun, as she always did. The light hadn't yet spilled over the distant ridge, but the air was already warming, dry and restless with wind. She fed the horses, checked the fences, and called out to the old blue heeler limping across the yard. Boomer never barked, but he didn't need to. The way his ears twitched was warning enough. By the time Claire noticed the tire tracks by the north fence, her gut had already told her something was off. They were too deep, too fresh, and heading the wrong way. There were no neighbors out that far. She crouched, fingers brushing the dry soil, studying the pattern. Wide spacing, heavy axle, military-grade suspension. Not rancher trucks. Not border patrol. She stood slowly, the wind pulling at her flannel like ghost fingers. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't need to. Because 10 years ago, before she took over the ranch, before her mother passed, and before her father vanished into a different kind of exile, he'd told her one thing. If anything ever feels wrong, don't call the cops. Call me. She hadn't spoken to him in years. She pressed the single number saved under the name Dust. He answered on the first ring. Claire, they're here. I'm on my way. Mason Dawes crossed into Texas like a shadow passing through steel. The border checkpoint barely registered him. Just another old man in an older truck, engine growling like a caged dog. His license plates didn't exist in any system that mattered. The rifle case in the back seat wasn't locked. He drove with purpose, silence, and a growing pressure in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not anxiety. Focus. He hadn't spoken to Claire since the funeral. Time and grief had carved canyons between them. But none of that mattered now, because someone had dared to threaten his blood. By the time he hit the gravel road leading up to the ranch, the sun was up. Dust curled behind his tires in a ribbon, marking his approach like smoke before fire. Claire met him at the gate, a rifle slung over her shoulder, defiance in her eyes. She hadn't changed. She still stood like her mother, spine straight, jaw set, unafraid. He stepped out of the truck, nodding once. Still remember how to shoot? He asked. You taught me too well, she replied. Good. We'll need every advantage. He scanned the horizon, then the tire tracks she marked with orange flags. Cartel scouting team, he said. Advance unit, probably armed. If they're here, the main force isn't far. What do we do? She asked. He turned to her slowly. We prepare the land, and we give them hell. The barn became the center of operations. Inside, Mason moved with calm efficiency, pulling tarp after tarp from hidden crates stashed in the hayloft years ago. Beneath the feed sacks and rusty tools was a small armory, suppressed rifles, claymore mines, tripwires, night vision goggles, satellite comms gear, all sealed in military-grade crates marked USMC training equip. Jesus, Claire murmured. How long has this stuff been here? Since before you were born, Mason replied. I bought this land for 2 reasons, to raise you right, and to have a fallback point in case things ever went sideways. He handed her a pack. Inside, a modern comms earpiece, a sidearm, and a compact field knife. We'll need you wired in, he said. You remember what I taught you about perimeter sweeps? Every step. Good. Start south. Look for anything out of place. If you see tracks, report. Do not engage. Claire nodded, strapping the gear without hesitation. As she moved out, Mason spread a map over the workbench. Every acre of the ranch had been surveyed, diagrammed, and annotated years ago. He traced his finger across the terrain, marking the likely points of approach. He muttered to himself, "They'll come from the ridgeline. They always think the high ground makes them smarter." He set to work. Tripwires disguised as broken fence lines. Spike traps buried in dry creek beds. Old irrigation pipes turned into homemade mortars. Every tool had a double use. Every inch of the ranch became a layered defense. The barn wasn't a structure anymore. It was a forward operating base. By sundown, Claire returned with intel. 3 vehicles, parked just over the ridge, covered in camo netting. Mason nodded. "That's the observation post. They'll watch us until they think we're vulnerable." "They won't find that moment, will they?" she asked. "No," he said, loading a magazine with practiced precision. "But they're welcome to try." By nightfall, the ranch had changed. What once was a peaceful spread of dry fields and rust-colored fences was now a war zone in disguise. Wind pushed through the tall grass like whispers of things to come. Somewhere beyond the ridge, eyes were watching. Inside the barn, a dim red light illuminated the table where Mason checked every weapon by hand. Claire returned, dust on her boots, sweat streaking her face. She dropped to one knee beside the map. Still 3 trucks. No movement. Mason didn't look up. They're waiting until night. They want to hit fast and loud. Claire frowned. Why not just come now? Because they're scared. They don't know what's here. Just that it's not normal. He handed her a thermal scope. "Tonight, we changed the rules." They moved like ghosts. The old irrigation lines along the western property had once brought water. Now they brought silence. Mason crept through the low ditch, rifle slung across his back, dragging a duffel filled with C4 flares. Claire was ahead, eyes sweeping the darkness, finger resting alongside the trigger. At the western tree line, Mason knelt and whispered, "You see that branch? Look again through thermal." She raised the scope. What looked like part of the tree line was warmer, an engine, a truck, covered in canvas and brush. 2 men nearby, rifles cradled, smoking. She exhaled. "They're sloppy." Mason didn't smile. "Sloppy is good." They worked in tandem. Claire covered the perimeter while Mason crawled on his belly, moving beneath the brush like he was back in Kandahar. He planted a shaped charge under the nearest tire, then retreated just as silently. Once they reached the ridge again, he flipped the safety off the remote detonator. "We wait." They did. The cartel watchers shifted, talked, laughed softly. They weren't prepared for what came next. Mason clicked the detonator. The explosion shattered the silence, flames roaring upward like a signal fire from hell. One of the trucks flipped, landing in a crumple of metal and heat. The 2 cartel men never saw the fragments coming. Claire ducked instinctively, but Mason stayed still, eyes watching through binoculars. 2 down, but now they'll come. She looked at him. "You sure? They'll want revenge, which means they'll move in daylight. That's their next mistake." At dawn, they were ready. Mason had spent the hours before sunlight placing decoys, scarecrows dressed in flannel, rifles stuck in their hands. Some had heat packs taped to their torsos to fool drones. Others were rigged with small charges to simulate gunfire when triggered. Claire stood on the porch, watching the ridgeline. She didn't blink. Boomer barked once, then fell silent again. "They're coming," she said. Dust bloomed on the horizon. 3 black SUVs speeding across the flatland, their approach loud, fast, arrogant. Mason was already prone beside the barn, sighted in through a high-powered scope. They'll go for the house. Makes sense to them. And the traps. They'll find him the hard way. As the SUVs closed in, the first one swerved, tires catching a wire Mason had strung through the high grass. The explosion turned the vehicle into scrap metal, fire erupting under its chassis. The second SUV veered hard to avoid the wreckage and slammed straight into a spiked trench, flipping end over end. Only the third made it through, tires shredded, its engine howling like a dying animal. It skidded to a halt in the yard. Gunmen spilled out. Claire ducked behind the old well, fired once, clean shot, center mass. Mason took out 2 more in 3 seconds, his rhythm unbroken. The final attacker made a run for the porch, but stepped directly on a pressure plate under the soil. The explosion lifted him off the ground and dropped him in pieces. Silence followed. Smoke hung in the air. The smell of burnt rubber, oil, blood. Claire stood slowly. That was the observation team. "No," Mason said, lowering his rifle. That was just the first pawns. She looked at him, face grim. Then what happens now? He stared at the horizon, already planning the next steps. Now we dig in. The real game starts at night. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the ranch. The air cooled, but the tension grew thicker with every passing minute. Mason and Claire moved silently through the compound, now transformed into a fortress of traps and hidden defenses. The quiet wasn't peace, it was the calm before the storm. Claire checked her earpiece, voice steady. Nothing yet. No movement. Mason nodded. They're regrouping, waiting for night cover. From the barn loft, Mason's team monitored the perimeter on a bank of screens hooked to motion sensors and remote cameras. They weren't just defending a piece of land. They were preparing for a battle in which every second could mean life or death. Claire, Mason whispered into the comms, "You're on sniper overwatch. I want eyes on the ridge. Call out anything suspicious." "Understood," she replied, settling into position near the old oak, rifle steady, breath slow. The darkness played tricks on the eyes, but Claire's training kicked in. She spotted the faint shimmer of heat just beyond the ridgeline, a movement too subtle for an untrained eye. Figures, shifting positions, whispering orders. "They're setting up camp," she reported, "probably waiting for reinforcements." Mason frowned. "Let's make sure they don't get comfortable." He slipped into the shadows with his sidearm and a silenced rifle. The plan was simple but deadly. Disrupt their rest, force them into chaos before the real assault. A flash of light. Mason triggered a remote flare several hundred meters away, painting the night sky with red. It was a signal. The dance had begun. From the ridge, startled voices shouted commands. Flashlights swung wildly, scanning the fields below. Mason fired once, a suppressed crack that echoed like a whisper. One man dropped silently. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked back, tracer rounds cutting through the dark. Claire adjusted her position, picking targets with surgical precision. Each shot was a message. The ranch was no easy prey. But the cartel was prepared. They unleashed their own snipers from concealed spots among the rocky outcrops, forcing Mason and Claire to move fast, ducking behind trees and low walls. Mason's team deployed smoke grenades, turning the battlefield into a murky haze. It wasn't about brute force. It was about control, deception, survival. The ranch had become a chessboard, and Mason the Grandmaster. Every move calculated, every piece deadly. Hours later, when the gunfire finally faded, Mason gathered the team around the makeshift command table. "We sent a clear message," he said, voice low but firm. "They'll be back, with reinforcements, heavier firepower. We need to be ready." Claire's eyes met his. "How long can we hold?" "As long as it takes. We have the advantage, knowledge of the land and the will to protect what's ours." Outside, the stars glittered cold and distant, indifferent to the battle raging below. The fight for Ironwood Valley was only beginning. The first rays of dawn crept cautiously over the horizon, washing the ranch in a soft, golden light. But beneath the calm surface, tension simmered like molten lava, ready to erupt. Claire sat on the porch steps, rifle resting across her lap, eyes scanning the distant ridgeline where the cartel's shadowy figures had disappeared into the night. She was exhausted but alert. Every muscle ached from hours of constant vigilance, but there was no room for weakness here. Mason joined her quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed her one without a word, sitting beside her on the weathered wood. "You did good last night," he said quietly. "Your shots were clean." Claire smiled faintly, the kind of smile that was both tired and proud. "Had a good teacher." Mason's gaze drifted toward the east, where the sun was beginning to burn away the early morning mist. "We've bought ourselves some time, but not much." Inside the barn, the team was already moving. Jax, the communications expert, was setting up a series of makeshift antennas and signal jammers. Riley, the demolition specialist, checked the placement of mines and improvised explosives along likely enemy approach paths. And Carter, the medic, prepped the small infirmary, ready for the inevitable. Mason moved through them like a calm storm, assessing every detail. He knew their chances depended not only on firepower, but on discipline and coordination. "Listen up," he called, gathering the team around the map spread on the workbench. "They're going to hit us hard, and soon. The ridge is their main vantage point, but we control the valley floor. Use the terrain. Funnel them through the creek bed traps. Push them into kill zones." Riley smirked, flexing his fingers. "I like it when they walk into my toys." Mason allowed himself a rare, brief chuckle. "Keep your toys quiet until they're triggered. Surprise is our ally." Claire stepped forward, the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. "What about reinforcements? The cartel's bigger than we imagined." Mason's eyes hardened. Reinforcements or not, they're walking into a ghost story. Dust Devil doesn't run. Dust Devil fights. He paused, then added softly, "And he's not alone anymore." The team exchanged looks, a mix of respect and determination. Years of experience had taught them the cost of underestimating a desperate enemy. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling dry branches and sending dust swirling across the open fields. The land was preparing, as if sensing the coming storm. Later that afternoon, Claire took a moment to walk the perimeter, checking the traps one last time. The sun beat down mercilessly, but her mind was elsewhere, on the family she protected, on the man who had shaped her into a fighter. She stopped at the old oak tree, where her father had first taught her how to shoot. She ran her hand along the bark, a silent promise passing between them. "We're ready, Dad," she whispered. "Come what may." As dusk fell again, the ranch settled into an uneasy silence. The team took up their positions, shadows blending into the landscape, waiting for the inevitable clash. Somewhere out there, the cartel was moving, gathering, planning, hungry for revenge. But Mason Dawes and his team were ready, because this wasn't just a fight for land. It was a fight for legacy. Night had fallen like a shroud over Ironwood Valley. The stars blinked faintly above, but the ranch was cloaked in darkness, pierced only by the faint red glow of Mason's tactical gear and the soft hum of radios. Claire crouched behind a low ridge, eyes sharp through her night vision goggles. The quiet was almost deafening, a stillness that screamed of danger lurking just beyond sight. "Movement, 10 o'clock, she whispered into her comms. Jax's voice crackled back, calm and precise. "Copy," confirming 3 figures moving along the ridge, armed and scanning. Mason was already positioned at the barn's rear, his silhouette blending with the shadows. He adjusted his rifle's scope, the cold steel comforting in his hands. "They're probing our defenses," Mason muttered, testing the waters. Claire's heart pounded, but she kept her breathing steady. Years of training had drilled this rhythm into her. "They think they're ghosts, but this is our ground," Mason said softly. "Wait for my signal." The trio moved with practiced stealth, shadows flickering as they advanced. The cartel scouts were closer now, careless in their confidence. Suddenly, a twig snapped under Claire's boot. She froze. The scouts spun, weapons raised. "Contact," Mason hissed. In an instant, the night erupted. Suppressed rifle shots rang out, muffled but deadly. Mason's team unleashed a carefully choreographed ambush. One scout dropped silently, a clean shot to the head. The others scrambled, seeking cover behind rocks and sparse bushes. Claire rolled behind a boulder, reloading swiftly. Her heartbeat steadied into the focused calm of a predator. Riley triggered a tripwire. A sharp crack echoed as a claymore exploded, sending one of the scouts sprawling. "Fall back," shouted one enemy, but it was too late. Mason pressed forward, methodically clearing the ridge with precise, ruthless efficiency. Within minutes, the scouting team was neutralized. Boomer emerged from the darkness, his silent presence a ghostly reminder of the Dawes family's watchful eyes. Mason crouched beside Claire, nodding approval. "They came for us," he said grimly, "and we sent a message." They searched the bodies quickly, finding radios and maps marked with the ranch's layout. "They know the land," Claire noted, tension thick in her voice. "They'll come prepared next time," Mason warned. "But so will we." Back at the barn, the team regrouped, patching wounds and updating intel. "This was just a scouting party," Jack said, tapping at his tablet. "The main force will arrive within 48 hours. Mason's jaw tightened. "Then we'll be ready. This ranch isn't just a home. It's a fortress." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant roar of engines and the faint murmur of voices. The battle for Ironwood Valley had begun. The first light of dawn cast a pale glow over Ironwood Valley, revealing a landscape scarred by battle preparations. The ranch was no longer a simple homestead. It had transformed into a fortress, bristling with deadly intent. Mason Dawes stood at the center of the barn, surrounded by his trusted team. Jax, the communications expert with a knack for hacking enemy signals. Riley, the demolition specialist whose hands were as steady setting charges as they were comforting a shaken teammate. And Lena, the sniper whose calm precision had saved lives in more conflicts than any of them wanted to count. All right, Mason began, spreading a detailed map across the rough wooden table. The room was thick with tension and the scent of diesel and dust. They've already sent a scouting team, and we know the main force is coming. Better armed, more dangerous. Claire listened closely, clutching her rifle, her eyes flickering between the map and the faces around her. They'll come up the ridge. Mason pointed to a jagged line on the map. High ground gives them the advantage they think they need. But, Jax added, they won't know what's waiting for them. Mason nodded. We've got tripwires, mines, and improvised mortars ready to greet them. But this isn't just about traps. It's about controlling every inch of the battlefield. He paced slowly, eyes sharp. Lena, you're on overwatch. Your shots will slow them down, pick off leaders, disrupt their formations. Lena gave a faint nod, already checking her scope's calibration. Riley, Mason continued, you and I will handle the explosives. When they push forward, we'll collapse the choke points. Their vehicles won't move an inch. Riley smiled grimly. I like the sound of that. Claire's gaze hardened. And me? You're the eyes on the ground, Mason said. Patrol the south perimeter. Spot any flanking maneuvers. Call it in immediately. You're fast, and you know this land better than anyone. Claire swallowed hard but nodded. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. Heavy, but not unwelcome. Outside, the team spread out, their movements practiced and precise. Mason watched as Claire slipped into the shadows, her silhouette disappearing into the scrub brush. The ranch was alive with whispered commands and the soft clicking of safety switches being engaged. Every fence line was reinforced, every fence posed a potential barrier against invasion. Boomer padded silently at Mason's side, his old but loyal presence a constant reassurance. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth beneath their feet. Dust swirled in lazy spirals as Mason walked the perimeter one last time, checking each trap and tripwire. This land had been in his family for generations, but today, it belonged to the warriors who had sworn to defend it. That evening, as the golden sun dipped below the horizon, the team gathered for a quiet moment. Mason broke out a bottle of whiskey, a rare luxury. To the family we choose, he toasted, eyes meeting each teammate's. And the fight we're about to win. Claire felt a warmth spread through her, not just from the drink, but from the brotherhood that had formed in these desperate hours. They were more than just a team now. They were a family forged in fire. As night deepened, Mason climbed to his sniper perch, eyes scanning the dark ridge beyond the valley. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying with it the distant hum of engines. They're coming, Lena murmured over the radio. Mason's fingers tightened on the rifle stock. Let them come. The battle for the Dawes Ranch was no longer a fight for survival. It was a war to reclaim their legacy, and Mason Dawes was ready to make the land itself rise against those who dared to take it. The night air was thick with tension, every breath feeling heavier than the last. From his vantage point, Mason Dawes could see faint silhouettes moving cautiously along the ridge. The Cartel scouts were attempting to gain intelligence, unaware that their presence had already been logged. Lena adjusted her scope, her breath steady. 2, maybe 3 in the northeast sector, moving slow and quiet, she reported through the comms. Good. Let's keep them nervous, Mason replied. Jax, any sign of comms traffic? Jax's fingers danced over his portable hacking rig. They're trying to send signals, but I'm jamming them. They won't know what hit him. Below, Claire crouched in the scrub, her eyes sharp, scanning for movement. The faint rustling of leaves and the snap of twigs made her pulse quicken, but she kept her composure, a lesson learned in the harshest school. Suddenly, a muffled crack, a sniper round. One of the Cartel scouts collapsed, silence immediately falling over the ridge. They think it's a ghost, Mason said quietly, loading another round. The ambush had begun. The first strike was a carefully orchestrated chaos. Tripwires exploded in bursts of dirt and flame, sending jagged shrapnel into the dark. Claymore mines detonated, their razor-sharp fragments carving lethal patterns through the advancing scouts. Riley and Mason worked in tandem, remotely detonating charges to collapse narrow paths and crush enemy vehicles trying to maneuver. "Vehicle disabled, east flank," Jax called out. The cartel was forced to regroup, scrambling back to safer ground, their arrogance shattered. In the barn-turn command center, Mason watched the live feed from Lena's scope and Jax's drone camera. "Pressure's on," he muttered. "They're not used to being hunted." Claire's voice crackled over the comms. "There's movement at the south ridge. Looks like a small squad trying to flank us." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Claire, hold your ground, but keep them spotted. Don't get drawn out." Claire pressed herself low behind a boulder, heart pounding as she called out the enemy's positions. "This isn't just a raid anymore," she thought. "It's a war on my home turf." The cartel's miscalculation was clear. They underestimated the defense, the knowledge, and the lethal precision of one man and his team. Back at the ridge, Mason's voice was calm but cold as ice. "They came for my daughter. Tonight, they'll learn why the dust devil never truly disappears." The night stretched into hours of gunfire and explosions, the battle raging like a storm that no one could stop. But as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, the cartel's scouts were either dead, captured, or fled in disarray. Mason lowered his rifle, breathing in the cool morning air. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We make them regret every step they take." Claire approached, eyes fierce but proud. "We held them off," she said. "Yeah," Mason smiled grimly. "But next time, they'll bring more than scouts. And we'll be ready." The sun had barely climbed above the horizon when the distant rumble began, a low, ominous sound rolling across the dusty plains like a coming storm. Mason's instinct screamed. The cartel was sending reinforcements. From the barn's lookout, Lena spotted the glint of armored vehicles crawling over the ridge. "They're bringing in heavy hitters," she reported, voice tense but steady. Mason gathered the team around the table. "This is their second wave, better trained, better armed, and probably angrier." Jax tapped his laptop furiously. "They've got at least 2 armored trucks, with mounted machine guns and support squads on foot." Claire tightened the straps on her gear, eyes hardening. "They think their firepower will break us. They haven't met the land, or the people who know how to fight on it," Mason said. The ranch transformed overnight. Every corner was fortified further, makeshift barriers reinforced, and escape routes planned with ruthless precision. Mason and his team divided their roles carefully. Riley took the south perimeter with explosives and tripwires primed for maximum damage. Lena was stationed in the barn tower, sniper rifle ready to pick off anyone daring to peek. Claire and Mason took to patrolling the western flank, where the terrain dipped into a narrow canyon, a natural choke point perfect for ambushes. "This land knows us better than they ever will," Mason told Claire as they moved through the brush. "And that knowledge is our deadliest weapon." The cartel advanced under cover of dusk, armored vehicles growling over the rough ground. The first shots came quickly, brutal bursts of machine gun fire shredding bushes and kicking up dust. But Mason's team was ready. Explosives blew up vehicles before they could deploy troops. Claymores snapped viciously, turning the narrow paths into kill zones. Lena's calm voice cut through the chaos. 2 down near the ridge. Sniper's nest compromised. Jax kept the enemy's communications scrambled, adding to their confusion. On the western flank, Mason and Claire spotted a squad trying to flank them through the canyon. "Move fast," Mason ordered. "Hit hard." Together, they unleashed a deadly hail of bullets and grenades, the cartel soldiers caught off guard and falling one by one. Despite the cartel's superior numbers, Mason's team leveraged every advantage: terrain, timing, and tactical precision. By midnight, the cartel's assault faltered, the attackers forced to retreat into the shadows. Mason wiped dirt from his face, voice low but satisfied. "They're starting to respect the ground they walk on." Claire, bruised but unbroken, nodded. "They'll think twice before coming back." But Mason's eyes remained cold and calculating. "This isn't over. They'll regroup, bring more firepower. We need to be ready." Back in the barn, Mason pulled out a faded photo, a younger version of himself, surrounded by comrades long gone. "This fight," he whispered, "it's for them too." The team understood, This wasn't just about protecting a ranch. It was about honor, legacy, and the ghosts that never rest. The night stretched on, thick with tension and the scent of spent gunpowder. Mason sat alone on the porch, the cold desert air biting at his skin as he stared into the darkness. The ranch lay quiet behind him, but the silence felt heavier than any firefight. Claire joined him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll be back. Stronger." Mason nodded, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "They always come back." She hesitated before asking, "Why did you disappear all those years ago? Why leave everything behind?" He looked at her then, the daughter he barely knew anymore, hardened by loss but still burning with that stubborn fire. "I needed to disappear so I wouldn't drag this life into yours," he said finally. "But I was always watching, always waiting. I knew this day might come." Claire swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling between them. "I'm glad you're here now." Inside the barn, the team gathered for a briefing. Maps sprawled across the table, every inch of terrain analyzed, and every possible enemy move anticipated. Lena pointed to a ridge on the eastern edge. "That's where the cartel's command post is likely set up. They're coordinating the reinforcements from there." Jax added, "We've intercepted some chatter. They're calling in a final wave at dawn. Helicopters, heavy artillery, the works." Mason's jaw clenched. "They want a war. Let's give them one." The plan was meticulous. Lure the cartel forces deeper into the ranch's defenses, use the natural terrain and traps to their advantage, and pick off the enemy before they could use their heavy equipment effectively. Claire checked her gear for the third time that night. "I'm ready." Mason gave a rare, faint smile. "Good. Because this land isn't just soil and stone, it's a battleground, and we're the ghosts haunting it." The hours before dawn were a blur of preparation. Tripwires reset, sniper positions adjusted, communication lines tested. Mason took a moment to walk the perimeter alone, a ghost himself, remembering every lesson from years in combat. How the land could hide you, protect you, and become your fiercest ally. The sun's first light was just a pale promise on the horizon when the rumble started again, louder this time, closer. The cartel's final wave was coming. The dawn broke, bleeding fiery orange across the endless Texas sky. The silence shattered as the ground trembled beneath the roar of engines. Four armored trucks crawled over the ridge, their shapes dark and menacing against the lightning horizon. Mason stood at the edge of the ridge, binoculars pressed tight to his eyes. The cartel's final wave had arrived, a well-armed force, confident and brash, certain their numbers would overwhelm the ranch's defenders. But they hadn't accounted for the ghost waiting in the dust. Claire crouched beside him, the weight of her rifle steady against her shoulder. Her breathing was controlled, every muscle coiled like a spring. "They're moving slow, almost cautious," she observed. Mason shook his head. "They've been watching too much TV. Real combat's a different game." With a flick of his hand, Lena radioed the team. "Positions confirmed. Wait for my mark." Hidden in the thickets below, snipers picked their targets. Mason's team moved like shadows, each member a living weapon honed by years of battlefield experience. The first sign that the ranch was no ordinary farm came in a sudden crack. A tripwire snapped under the weight of the lead truck. Almost immediately, a sharp whistling filled the air as improvised mortar rounds launched from hidden pipes exploded with brutal precision against the convoy. Chaos erupted. Soldiers ducked and scrambled, bullets tearing into the dry earth. Mason moved fast, leading a group that circled around the flank, using every dip and rise in the land as cover. Claire took aim, firing carefully. Each shot was calculated, picking off those who tried to escape the kill zone. Behind them, Jax activated the comms jammer, cutting off any calls for reinforcements. The cartel soldiers, trained for brute force, found themselves disoriented and under siege. Their confidence bled away as one by one, they fell to the ranch's deadly defenses. A truck exploded, sending a fireball skyward. The blast rocked the ground beneath Mason's feet, but he didn't flinch. "Keep pushing," he ordered. "Drive them into the creek traps." Claire nodded, her hands steady even as the adrenaline surged. The creek, once just a dried channel, was now a death trap. Deep pits covered with fragile brush, spikes hidden beneath the earth. As the cartel's forces stumbled into the ambush, the rancher's trap claimed more lives. Suddenly, The sound of rotor blades cut through the gunfire. The cartel's helicopters had arrived, armed with heavy machine guns and rockets. Mason cursed under his breath. They want to burn this place down. Not if I can help it, Lena replied grimly, lining up a shot with her anti-material rifle. She squeezed the trigger, the heavy round punching through the first chopper's tail rotor. The helicopter spiraled violently, crashing into a distant mesa with a deafening explosion. The second helicopter banked, searching for targets. Mason barked out orders to deploy smoke grenades and to shift positions. As the battle escalated, Claire moved through the chaos with lethal grace. Every shot she fired was a message. This land wasn't theirs for the taking. She caught a glimpse of a cartel commander barking orders, his arrogance now tinged with panic. "Target him," Mason growled into the radio. Seconds later, Claire's bullet found its mark. The commander collapsed, his men faltering. By midday, the cartel's forces were in full retreat, scattered and broken. Mason surveyed the battlefield, sweat mixing with dirt on his brow. "This land isn't just dirt and fences anymore," he muttered. "It's a tomb for those who forget what it means to fight." Claire approached, wiping soot from her cheek. "What now?" Mason's eyes burned with a cold fire. "We prepare for their next move. They won't quit, and neither will we." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the scarred landscape. The once quiet ranch bore the marks of battle: scorched earth, shattered fences, and the lingering scent of smoke and gunpowder. Silence fell heavy, but Mason knew this was only a brief pause before the storm returned. Claire moved through the wreckage, her eyes scanning for any signs of life, friend or foe. Bodies lay scattered, some familiar faces among Mason's team, others unknown enemies. She knelt beside a fallen soldier, gently closing his eyes. "They didn't expect this," she murmured. "No," Mason agreed, his voice low and steady. "They thought this was just a farmer's land, easy pickings. They underestimated everything." Back in the barn, Mason convened with his team. Maps spread across tables, illuminated by the soft glow of battery-powered lamps. Radios crackled with sporadic updates. The cartel's communications were fragmented, but enough to show their desperation. Lena paced, rubbing the back of her neck. "They're pulling back, but regrouping fast. Probably calling reinforcements." Jack shook his head, eyes narrowed. "With the helicopters down, their air support's crippled, but they'll come harder. We've only slowed them." Mason nodded, fists clenched. "Good. That gives us time to strengthen our defenses." He looked at Claire, who was already studying the maps. "What do you see?" She traced a finger along a narrow canyon a few miles away. "If they regroup there, it'll be a staging point for a bigger strike. We need to hit them before they get organized." Mason made a decision. "Tonight, a small team goes out. We take the fight to them." Claire volunteered immediately. "I'm in." Lena and Jax exchanged glances, but nodded. "We'll cover you." The night air was sharp and cold as the four moved out, shadows slipping through the rugged terrain like ghosts. Every step was silent, every breath measured. Claire's heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming what was theirs. They reached the canyon rim just as moonlight bathed the valley below. Fires flickered among the cartel's tents. Men relaxed, unaware of the approaching storm. Mason surveyed the scene, then motioned. The attack was swift and brutal. Explosions shattered the calm. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Cartel soldiers scrambled, caught off guard by the precision strike. Claire's shots were deadly, taking out sentries before alarms could sound. Lena planted charges on supply crates, turning resources into flames. Jax hacked into their comms once more, feeding false commands that sent confusion rippling through enemy ranks. The cartel's retreat was chaotic, men tripping over themselves, desperate to escape the unexpected assault. Returning to the ranch under cover of darkness, Mason's team moved quickly to reinforce defenses and tend to the wounded. Back in the barn, Mason looked over his team, tired, bloodied, but unbroken. "This is more than just a fight for land," he said quietly. "It's a message." Claire nodded, determination burning in her eyes. "We're not just defending a ranch. We're defending our lives, our family." As dawn approached, Mason stepped outside, staring into the horizon where smoke still curled faintly from the distant canyon. He felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a war. but one he intended to win. The morning sun burned through a haze of dust and smoke, casting a harsh light over the battered ranch. The air was thick with tension, the calm before the inevitable storm. Mason Dawes and his team worked quickly to patch wounds, repair damaged defenses, and prepare for what was coming. Claire stood near the gate, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. She could still feel the echo of gunfire in her bones, the taste of adrenaline lingering on her tongue. But there was no time to rest. A low rumble in the distance caught her attention. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she saw the dust clouds, larger, faster, and moving with purpose. "They're coming back," she said, voice steady but sharp. Mason appeared beside her, face grim. "They've called in heavy support." From the ridge above, the cartel's reinforcements rolled in, trucks bristling with machine guns, men armed to the teeth, and behind them, the unmistakable thump of helicopters cutting through the air. This was no longer a scouting party or a hit-and-run group. This was an assault. Mason turned to his team. "This is what we trained for." Inside the barn, plans were drawn and redrawn, commands given with precision. Every soldier knew their role: sniper nests, demolition points, communication relays, and medical stations. Claire was assigned to the eastern flank, a choke point where the terrain funneled attackers into a narrow pass. "Remember," Mason reminded her, "they have numbers. But we have the advantage: terrain, traps, and surprise." The first wave hit hard. Gunfire erupted from every corner, bullets pinging off metal and wood. Explosions tore through the dry earth as mines and improvised explosives shredded tires and tore into legs. Claire fired from a concealed position, picking off cartel soldiers one by one, her breath steady, her aim deadly. Above, helicopters circled, dropping grenades and suppressive fire, but Mason's team was ready. The barn's reinforced walls absorbed the blasts, while hidden countermeasures disabled some of the aircraft's targeting systems. Amid the chaos, Mason moved like a ghost, coordinating attacks, setting ambushes, and keeping morale high. "Jax, get eyes on the south ridge," he barked. "Boomer, take point with the med kit. We've got wounded incoming." The battle stretched on for hours, the sun climbing higher as the ranch became a war zone. At one point, a cartel commander broke through the defenses, charging toward the barn with a small squad. Claire met them head-on. Her rifle cracked, taking down two before the commander lunged at her with a knife. They grappled, the struggle fierce and desperate. Claire's training took over. A quick twist, a jab, and the commander collapsed, lifeless. She barely had time to breathe before reinforcements arrived, forcing her to retreat to a secondary position. Meanwhile, Mason spotted movement near the ridge. "Their leader," he muttered, eyes sharp. This man was no ordinary thug. The cartel commander was arrogant, ruthless, and clever, a mirror of Mason's own past in many ways. He would not let this fight end easily. As the battle raged, Mason prepared for the inevitable confrontation. He moved quietly, weapon ready, eyes scanning for the man who had brought this chaos to his land. When they finally met, it was under the harsh glare of the afternoon sun, two warriors locked in a deadly dance. Bullets flew, strategies clashed, and for every move one made, the other countered. The fight was brutal and personal. Mason's years of experience versus the cartel leader's raw aggression. But it was Mason's calm, his tactical mind, and the weight of every lesson learned in decades of warfare that gave him the edge. In the end, the cartel leader lay defeated, captured, his reign of terror broken. As the sun set behind the mountains, silence finally returned to Ironwood Valley. The cartel's forces scattered, broken and leaderless. Mason and Claire stood side by side, battered but unbowed. "We've won this battle," Mason said quietly. "But the war isn't over." Claire nodded, eyes scanning the horizon where darkness gathered. "We'll be ready." Night had settled over the ranch, cloaking the land in a deep, quiet darkness. The only light came from the flickering fire pit near the barn, where Mason and Claire sat, exhausted but alert. The distant sounds of retreating engines had finally faded, replaced by the soothing chorus of crickets and the gentle rustling of the wind through mesquite trees. Mason lit a cigarette, the ember glowing bright in the dark. He exhaled slowly, eyes reflecting the flames. "This land," he began, voice low, "is more than just dirt and fences. It's family. It's memory. It's legacy. Claire nodded, her gaze fixed on the fire. I never thought I'd see the day when the ghosts from your past would come knocking like this. He smiled faintly. Ghosts don't always stay in the past. Sometimes, they have to fight to protect the future. In the days that followed, the Dawes Ranch returned to a semblance of normalcy. Repairs were made, the land tended, and the wounds, both physical and emotional, slowly began to heal. But beneath the surface, something had changed. Claire and Mason were no longer just father and daughter, separated by years of silence and regret. They were a team, bonded by blood and battle. Their relationship forged anew in the crucible of violence and survival. The news of the cartel's defeat spread quietly through West Texas, whispered among law enforcement and rival gangs alike. The message was clear. This was no ordinary ranch. This was the domain of the Dust Devil, a man who had turned the art of war into a weapon against those who threatened his family. And those who dared to cross that line would pay the price. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mason and Claire stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the horses graze in the fading light. "I'm proud of you," Mason said, placing a hand on Claire's shoulder. "You fought like a soldier." Claire looked up, eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and determination. "I learned from the best." He chuckled softly. "Good, because the world is never going to stop trying to take what's ours." They stood together in the growing dark, ready for whatever would come next. In the quiet moments before dawn, Mason reached for his phone and dialed a number saved under Old Ghost. On the other end, a voice answered with a calm familiarity. "Mason." "It's done," Mason said simply. "About time," the voice replied. "We've got your back." The Dust Devil had returned, not just as a warrior, but as a guardian. His fight was far from over. For Claire, for the ranch, and for every family that stood in the way of ruthless men who believed they could take what didn't belong to them. This is the story of Mason Dawes, the most feared ex-Marine turned rancher, and how one man's legacy became a beacon of resistance against a merciless cartel. If this story grabbed you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Tomorrow, we'll take you inside the shadowy world of cartel intelligence, how the drug lords operate, and what it takes to outsmart them. Stay tuned.